and welcome to Bible Study Hub. My name is Noelle. Here with me, I have my beautiful mother, and the screen's all reversed. I have no idea which side you're on. I'm so sorry. We're live streaming tonight. We're in Daniel chapter 2. I'm excited to start with you. We always go through just the Bible, going through hard passages, talking about interesting things. We always encourage you to comment, share your thoughts, tell us your opinions and what's standing out to you while we do this, whether you're live or whether you're watching later. So let's start out with just a quick intro, running start. How did we get here? We did Daniel chapter 1 last week, some of chapter 2. Mom, give us the background so we can get started on this.
Right. So Daniel has basically been taken hostage by the Babylonians. He was part of the royal family. They hauled him off to Babylon in the first deportation hostage. And at this time, Daniel really takes a stand for what the Bible says. He refuses to eat the food that is given to him, and it ends up working out okay for him because God blesses, and he and his friends that only ate the vegetables and drank the water end up in better looking shape than all of the others who were eating all of the king's food. So Daniel has the favor of God on his life even at this moment. But what we were reading about last week was that Nebuchadnezzar, the king at the time, has this dream that terrifies him. We were saying last week, we don't know if he couldn't remember it or if he was like, I'm going to test the wise men of Babylon to see if they can tell me the dream because I don't believe they're actually doing what they say they can. As it turns out, the wise men, when they are told by Nebuchadnezzar that they not only have to interpret the dream, they have to tell him what he dreamed, they freak out and they tell him, nobody can do what you're asking us to do. Like, only the gods can do this. And the gods, they say, don't live with men. Nebuchadnezzar is so furious. He is so angry that he issues an edict that all the wise men of Babylon are to be killed. And not just killed, but killed in a dismemberment, burn your house down sort of way. So Daniel is counted as part of this whole entourage because he was brought to Babylon to be trained to be a wise man. So Ariak, working for the king, comes to round up Daniel, and Daniel's like, what's going on? As he's probably being cuffed, tied up. He's like, what's going on? And Ariak starts to tell him. And Daniel says, you know what? I need to make an appointment with the king because I can tell him what the dream is and the interpretation. So Ariak's like, okay, we'll make the appointment. And so we're going to pick up in verse 17 of Daniel chapter 2, and we're going to read what Daniel does next. He's just stated he can do the absolute impossible. Of course, it's not him. We know it's God doing it through him. But he said, I can do it. So let's find out what's next for Daniel.
I love it. I love it. Let's just read this. This is Daniel chapter 2, verse 17 through 19. It says, Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. And he told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Oh, I love this. You just notice Daniel puts all his eggs in one basket here. If God doesn't come through for him, there is no plan B. He and all his friends, all the wise men, are going to be executed. And I think it's interesting for a moment to stop and put myself in Daniel's shoes. If this guy comes to me and is like, yeah, we're going to put everybody to death, and this is the situation, the king has made this absolutely impossible request, what do I do? What's my mindset? I don't think I would have responded with the boldness and the courage and the faith that Daniel does. He makes very wise decisions on his part. He schedules this appointment with the king even before he knows the dream and its interpretation, which just strikes me as extraordinary. What else does he do that's noteworthy here, Mom?
Well, I kind of like to compare how he handles a situation with what we tend to do in current Christian culture, because he gathers his friends together to pray about it. And in our current Christian culture, in a lot of areas, it's kind of all contingent on your faith. Like, it's your faith that really activates the power of God. If you have enough faith, God will act. And it's all about your faith, not nearly so much about the mercy of God, the power of God. And what you don't see anywhere in this passage is the word faith. Now, obviously, it's implied here that Daniel had huge faith because he's putting all his trust and all his faith in God, or he gets, dismembered. So we know that that's a part of it. But what Daniel talks about is the word mercy. It says in verse 18, and he told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery. He doesn't claim anything. He doesn't speak it into existence. He doesn't bind Satan. He says, let's seek God for mercy. And when you think about it, every answered prayer is God's mercy, because we don't ever rise to the level of deserving it. As sinners, we are at his mercy for his grace, his forgiveness, his goodness, all of it, all the time. And Daniel just inherently knows all of this. There's something else that he does that I think is really interesting, Noelle, and that is he doesn't sit by passively and go, well, in the sovereignty of God, God's going to do what he's going to do. So why would we even bother praying about it? I mean, if God's going to save us, he is. And if he's not, he's not.
Yeah.
Why would I waste my time praying? Why does Daniel not take that approach?
Well, this is just this actually speaks to me because I find myself generally being a little bit more fatalistic in nature. That is, well, what's going to happen is going to happen. What God's will is God's will. This is just let it go. And I think what's so incredible is that Daniel exhibits such a robust understanding of prayer, and that also he has such an understanding of the mercy of God. He understands that God ordains both the means as well as the ends. So God in his sovereignty already has the end planned out. God also understands the means. And so that means God accomplishes what he wants to do, but he often uses us and uses our prayers in the process of doing that. And I also love this. His faith was so clearly in God and in God's mercy and in God's providence over his life, instead of just like having faith in his own faith, like having faith that, his faith in his prayer is going to make it happen. It's really this just looking to the God of heaven, just asking for mercy in this incredible way. So faith is by no means futile. The prayers are by no means just compulsory or this, sort of action we take. It doesn't have a lot of meaning. But really, It's this idea that there is a mystery. God is merciful. And I almost hear Daniel saying, Lord, would you give us the ability to be the action that happens here? We know you're going to do something. We'd like to be part of the plan that you have. We want to be the ones doing it. Would you make that possible? And we see God do that. Daniel, you're about to see, Daniel receives the answer to this prayer. But is it an immediate answer, Mom?
Well, no. It's a vision in the night. So I assume it was that night. But God doesn't just instantaneously go, okay, you got it. I'm sure that they went to prayer and they prayed hard and they really sought the Lord for help on this. And then Daniel does get the revelation. And I love how he's about to just absolutely burst forth in just praise. And we bolded some words here. That's our bold. Anytime you see bold in this, it's us doing that. But I wanted to bold all the pronouns that are God, because it is so God-centric here. Noelle, read that for us.
Absolutely. Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. For you have been made known to us the king's matter. Yeah, it's an eruption of praise and just solely focused on the incredible work and providence and mercy and might and sovereignty of God here. He credits God exclusively with giving him wisdom and understanding. These true gifts, he takes absolutely no credit for it. You also notice that he in no way attributes his prayer to somehow forcing God's hand on it or being the activating factor in this. This is all about God. Daniel doesn't take a shred of credit for what's going on here. And that's no accident. He has such a deep understanding of his relationship with God and how it works. I made a comment last week that our relationship with God isn't transactional. That means we don't do something and then he gives us something because we did it. It's not like, God's like, well, I was going to do that for you, but you didn't do this, or you didn't pray, or, oh, bummer, I really wanted to make this happen, but unfortunately your faith hasn't activated that yet. It's like a video game protocol. No. Daniel understands God has a plan. God's going to accomplish his plan. But Daniel's excited that he gets to be part of that plan. And I love that. It's so
Amen.
beautiful. Let's move on to verse 24, because so Daniel's got the answer to prayer, this impossible ask. It says, therefore Daniel went into Ariak. Remember, this is the guy who is charged with killing all the wise men, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king. I will show the king the interpretation. Oh, this is fascinating.
No appointment needed. He'd made an appointment. He's like, don't need the appointment. I have it now. I can go right now. But you know what I think is really interesting, Noelle, is because we talked last week about these wise men. They were occultists. And as a Jew, Daniel knew, we talked about this last week, if you want to go back and listen to it, if you missed it, Daniel knew that God absolutely, without question, did not want the Jews participating in anything that had to do with the occult, which is Satan, consulting the dead, witchcraft, all of those things. So Daniel was prohibited from even having contact with these people. Listen, the very first thing he does, amazingly, is he goes, don't kill these guys. Don't kill them. I can solve the problem. Yeah. He has just highlighted in his song of praise to God the mercy of God, and in his prayer, the mercy of God. And he turns around and he shows that same mercy to those around him, because he could have thought, well, we don't like these guys anyway. They're evil. I mean, they're evil to the core. They're horrible people. I'll let Nebuchadnezzar do whatever he wants with those guys. I can save myself and my friends, but I'm going to let those guys go. And the very first thing he does is save their necks.
Yeah.
I just think that is
incredible.
Stellar. Yeah.
It's incredible. And this perfectly mirrors other passages that we see where it talks about, because we have experienced the mercy and the grace and the forgiveness of God, we will naturally extend that to other people in our lives who do not deserve mercy and do not deserve grace and do not deserve forgiveness, because we don't deserve it. And we've been given this. And that's what's so beautiful about how Daniel moves in here. You don't see any passivity from him. Let's move on now. I want to read 25 through 26, because this. You know what?
Before we do, Noelle, I have a question for our viewers. So if you're on YouTube, by the way, if you're on YouTube, we're going to see your questions come in tonight. So that's yay. And if you're on Facebook, we can do that too. This Ariak guy who Daniel is working with, he's about to take Daniel in front of the king. I want to know, what do you think is going through Ariak's mind? So, in other words, he's in the situation. He sees what's going on. He knows what his job, go ahead and start commenting. He knows what his job has been given to him from the king to do. You always do what the king says without exception. Daniel is saying, make an exception. Don't do the job he told you. In fact, don't do any of the job. Don't even take care of the other guys. Let me go to the king. What do you think is going through Ariak's mind at this very moment? I mean, like, put yourself in his shoes, because I think we gloss over this. This isn't a person who knows the true God. This is a polytheist, a pagan, and he's got this guy, Daniel, this probably 14-year-old, we think, something like that. Okay. Yeah. I love the first thing that came up. One more person to execute. Ariak's life is going to be me. Someone else is fearing for his head. Kathy says, you're crazy.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, 100%. He's probably worried about Daniel. This is actually an interesting one. I want to talk about this for a moment, because this is fascinating. He's probably worried about Daniel. We see that the fact that he even lets Daniel have this interaction indicates that they actually had some sort of relationship. These were not nice people. These were not confident. Like to have a guy come and be like, hey, could you just hang off on executing us? Can I make just an appointment with the king real quick? Because we're going to get this worked out. And then to trust him enough to do that. Oh my goodness, that says something, doesn't it? And I'm wondering if the king is going to kill him. I mean, that would be a concern. That should be. These, again, not normal.
You know it.
Who does he think he is? What is up with this guy? I know, but here's what I love. He's slowly getting to see what God does through Daniel. And I do
very
wonder
good
if this is the extent of it. This is not the first time that Daniel has said, hey, you know, I'm going to ask for something ridiculous and impossible, and you have no logical reason to do it. And then they do it, and it turns out great because God's way is always the best way. I do wonder if Ariak had seen that and was like, you know what, this guy's pulled it together in the past. Maybe we want to let him go on this. Maybe we want to let him go. And I love this. God was at work. He so was. God was moving during this whole thing. Amazing answers from all of you, as always.
I love it.
Brilliant. Well, let me put up verse 25. Because Ariak does. He says that Ariak brought in Daniel before the king in haste. So he moves him in and said thus to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. He has a lot of trust in Daniel. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? This is what we were just talking about. The king didn't just ask for the dream to be interpreted. He also wanted to know what the dream was. Straight up impossible ask. Let's talk for a moment, though, because in verse 26, it says, king declared to Daniel, his name was Belteshazzar. Okay, we talked about this last week, but Mom, it's interesting. There's a juxtaposition in this passage when we understand what that name means. What is that?
Well, as we talked about before, these Jewish guys that they brought over were all given Babylonian names. So what we'd said before is their Hebrew names all reflected the one true God. The Babylonian names reflected the Babylonian gods. And yet the boys just let that go. They just accepted it because that did not damage them internally. So they were like, I'm sure, okay, hate it, but okay, we'll take it. But when it says that Daniel, his name was Belteshazzar, Belteshazzar would have been his court name for sure. The king would have had absolutely addressed him as Belteshazzar, not as Daniel. And Belteshazzar means God, little g, Bel was one of their gods. Belteshazzar. Bel, protect the king. And I'm just like, this is so ironic. Like, God has a sense of humor when this happens. So he brings in Bel, protect the king, knowing full well he's about to execute every wise man in his entire kingdom because Bel cannot help him. And Daniel says, actually, it's not Bel. It's the one true God. And he is going to protect the king. He is going to give you the answer that you're looking for.
Beautiful.
Love it.
That's so beautiful.
Give us a like for that.
Daniel's response. Daniel answered the king and said, no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be after this. And he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. Incredible. This is, again, Bel could not save the king, and yet there is a God in heaven who makes mysteries known and who has decided to reveal these things. What's also amazing about this is Daniel's about to reveal what the dream was and its interpretation, but God also shared with him that the king was lying in bed thinking about what would happen after he was gone. He would have no way of knowing this. The king was lying there thinking about what would happen to his kingdom and what the future would hold. Not only does he give what he was asked to give, he gives even more than that. And again, Daniel just lays 100% of credit, 100% of glory at the feet of God. And then, okay, then he recounts the dream.
Buckle your seatbelt. Here we go.
Okay,
here we
Mom,
go.
I'm going to have you read this dream.
Yep.
Because, folks, I'm telling you, this is about to get a little bit wild. But what you're about to hear is this description of a statue that the king saw in his dream. She can come into the picture.
She's been trying to get up here all night.
She's dying to be there. You're about to hear a description of what the king saw in this dream. What's amazing is there's an artist who has created a rendition of this. So while Mom reads this, I'm going to put up this artist's rendition of what this looked like. And I think it's really going to pull this together for you. So Mom, go ahead and read this for us, because I just think this is extraordinary.
So verses 31 to 35 is where we are, but I want you to really look at the statue while I'm reading it, if you can just listen. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on the feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So there you go. You can buy it on Etsy if you want to, although I don't recommend that.
Yeah.
The things you find on Etsy when you're trying to prep for Bible study.
It's so perfectly done, though. Let's just make a note. So this dream is one statue that is made out of 5 separate elements, not 5 separate statues, one statue. Just hold that in your mind for a moment.
That's important. That's one statue, not 5.
The little guy that you just saw.
One
guy. Nebuchadnezzar is silently listening here, but Daniel had to be correct if he's not interrupting him here. Now, let's find out what we've been waiting for. What did that all mean? Oh my! If you're like me, you just read that and you're like, okay, well, weird dream. I've had some weird dreams too, but that's a level of specificity I'm not used to. It's fascinating. What does this all mean?
Well, aren't we thankful that the Bible tells us? And so does Daniel. He tells the king. Go ahead, Noel.
Thank goodness. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he was given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all of these. Okay. We put a little poll out on our Facebook group ahead of this, just asking, in your readings, in your study, what have you been told some of these mean? And it was really interesting to hear. Some of you had heard certain things. Some of you have never even heard of this before. And if you're in the camp that's like, I've never heard this. This is a little outrageous. Not sure what any of this means. Get ready, because this is beautiful. And if you have heard things about this and you've studied this, just for a few minutes, would you would you set that aside and let's just read the text and see what we can get out of it without coming in with a preconceived idea? I was taught some very specific things about this passage, and then when we actually started studying it, I was like, oh, that doesn't actually make a lot of sense. I need to stop thinking in those terms and in that paradigm to really understand what this means. We'll get into the toes and the mixture of clay and all this stuff, but let's first define what these 4 kingdoms are, because it's really important that we get these correct.
Right.
Mom, you want to start talking us through this?
Yeah. So the first one is the easiest because Daniel's like, the gold, that's you. so we know. And Nebuchadnezzar, he knew gold, that's him. He's the head of the statue. So the Babylonian Empire is what we're talking about there, slam dunk. The silver is conclusively, yes, the Medo-Persian Empire, which at this point had not yet come on the scene, but is going to conquer Babylon. How do we know this? Well, history just bears it out, but also so often scripture actually interprets itself. And you may have to look a little bit ahead to get the interpretation sometimes, but it's often there. So later on in Daniel 5:28 and also Daniel 8:20, we are told that the kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So there it is. We know for sure the Medes and the Persians are the silver. Then we go down to the bronze. That is Greece. And again, Daniel interprets it for itself in Daniel 10:20. We are told this is Greece. He says in verse 20, then he said, do you know why I've come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. So there you go. So Daniel tells us. Here's where it gets a little tricky, though. Those legs of iron, Daniel doesn't tell us who that is specifically. So this is where we have to use really excellent, ready for a big word, hermeneutics. If you're like, I'm going to have to log off now. Don't log off. That's just a big term that just simply is the science and art of interpreting the scriptures. And you have to have a really good hermeneutic to get it right. And there are certain things that we apply to the text to make sure that we don't impose on it some meaning that we like, that sounds great to us, maybe it's something we've been told our whole lives, but that really doesn't meet the criteria for studying the Bible in a very, very accurate, concrete sort of way. So Noelle, let's go through what the 2 possibilities are that we can think of for what these legs of iron are. And then we'll really exert a really, really solid hermeneutic and see which one of these wins.
Absolutely. So the one that I was always taught, and maybe some of you were told this too, is that the legs of iron represent the Roman Empire. And again, if you're a student of Bible prophecy, you probably don't even know that there's more than one possible interpretation of this. I certainly didn't before we started studying this. So most prophecy teachers, if you start Googling this, you'll get, frankly, kind of a definitive answer. They're going to be like, this is definitely the Roman Empire. And there's some good reasons for this. This would be the next major empire in linear succession. So there have been more world empires than this for sure, but none that were next in line in this sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 system. And then Rome was indeed autocratic. That is, they came in with that sort of usual dictatorial, do it our way or face execution type of mentality. They conquered the world. And then the other thing, and this is what, sort of cinched it in all the times I've taught this, is that Rome used a lot of iron in their weaponry, and the legs of iron, that would make sense. So, if they're using swords and stuff to crush, and that's iron, that would make sense. And to my Western, very American mind, this makes total sense. Because again, it's the empire in linear succession. We're very, very familiar with the Roman Empire. I took a lot of Western civilization classes in high school and in college. So I'm very familiar with Rome, the Roman Empire. We see the Roman Empire in the New Testament. So it's like, this is just forefront in our minds. It makes a lot of sense. But I would say that because we're so familiar with it and because it is so, just ingrained in us from an academic or literature perspective, that probably biases our interpretation of this text. And when you were talking a moment ago about having a good hermeneutic, the reason we want to have some rules and some structure and some science behind how we interpret things is to make sure that when we're interpreting the text, we're not coming in and putting our lens on top of it and making it say the things we want to say. We're not saying things that aren't true about it. And I've certainly had this in a lot of other things where I'll read some literature, I'll look at something, and I'll come to a very different conclusion than what the author meant, because I was born and raised in America with an American public school education. And so I look at the world in a very specific way. But in order for us to really understand the Bible, we just talk about this constantly. We deeply need to understand the culture that it was written to, the culture that it was written in, and then what the author would have intended in the different ways of looking at this. So that's sort of the Western perspective. If I'm taking my very American Western view on this, I go, okay, Roman Empire makes a lot of sense. There is another option, though. And I think it's really important we consider what the other option is as well in order to really examine, is this a good hermeneutic? Walk us through the second option, Mom.
The second option we would call the Islamic Empire. So as we go into the hermeneutic, and I'm going there now because this is the only reason we would ever come up with this, is context, context, context. Huge in Bible interpretation. You never want to just pull a verse out and then just, that's my verse, Dad. You can make it say almost anything. You want to know what comes before it, what comes after it. Like Noelle said, even who it's written to, where it was written, all of this. So if we say to ourselves, okay, so contextually here, who was this dream given to? Obviously, it was King Nebuchadnezzar. We just said that. King of Babylon. The kingdoms that will succeed this king succeed a Babylonian, Middle Eastern king. It can't just be any old empire. There's been more empires than what's listed in the statue across the nations, across the world of all time. So we have to keep this in mind. It is one statue, not 5 separate ones, one statue. There is cohesion here in the text. So whatever these iron legs are, they have to fall in succession to a Middle Eastern king located in the Middle East. And so that brings us to the second point of context, which is, where is the location of this story? Where was this king located? And it was Babylon. If you're like, I don't remember where Babylon is, it's nowhere I've ever visited. No, you probably haven't, because it's located in modern day Iraq. So the first 3 kingdoms, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greek, take place primarily in the Middle East, a little bit into North Africa, a little bit maybe into Europe. So again, the people listening to this, the people who would be reading this, they are Eastern centric in their thoughts, their history, their culture, all of that. We're not. So we're going to try to get our brains a little bit more Eastern here so we can see if this works out. So Noelle, can you pop up the first map that we have? Because I think this really, like, a picture is truly worth 1,000 words. We've got 4 pictures. So like 4,000 words. Done. Okay. So here is what you're seeing highlighted or shaded is the Babylonian kingdom. So you can see there on the map, kind of get the idea. You've got Jerusalem. So hopefully that tells you where Israel is. You've got Egypt to the west. You've got just the Middle East over there to the east of it. So this would be like modern day Iraq, Iran, countries like that. Go to the next one, Noelle.
Let's do it. All right.
This is the Silver Kingdom. This is Medo-Persia. And I want you to notice it is larger than the Babylonian kingdom, but it encompasses everything that was in the Babylonian kingdom. So
let me toggle between these because I want you to see. So you've got Little Babylon.
Thank you.
And you've got Medo-Persian. You see it still takes up that same section, a little bit bigger though.
Yes.
Quite a bit bigger. But still eastern part of the world.
There you go. As you can probably guess, the Grecian Empire is next. Keep your eye on that. Remember what the purple is, because there it is in green. All right, that's the Grecian Empire. Do you notice it also encompasses everything that Babylonian Empire encompassed? And then, they're not exactly the same, but they don't have to be exactly the same. It's the same area of the world. All right, Noelle, put up a map of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that we don't have this perfectly overlaid. It's a little tough to do, but
I know we couldn't find a map. There it is.
Okay, so position us. What on earth? You understand? This is England, Rome, Italy. Okay, wait. So where were we? Okay. This is a completely different section of the world. Like, yeah, you've got some of what we just saw encompassed, but the reason that we had to put up a different map is because this goes way, 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 way far west. This is not the same part of the world. And this is why we talked about a little bit ago. It's really important to understand that when we are looking at the, this statue, it is one statue. We're not talking about multiple statues. So that means really we need this to be a continuation, a succession, a line. When you see the Babylonian Empire, it's taken over by the Medo-Persian Empire. That's what succeeds it. That's what comes after King Nebuchadnezzar. And then from that comes the Grecian Empire, and that's what succeeds it. And then you've got Rome, which the Roman Empire, it takes part of it, but this is kind of a different beast altogether.
Beast is a good word.
Yeah, well, yeah. So it's really easy from a just purely linear perspective going, okay, so from a timeline perspective, Rome comes next.
Which, by the way, is a very, very, very Western point of view.
Yes.
It is not an Eastern. Yeah, and I didn't mean to cut you off, Noel, but I just want to say this. There is precedent in the Bible because the Islamic kingdom did not succeed Greece in a linear passage. It did succeed it, but there was probably, I'm trying to think of when the Grecian Empire actually stopped. There was a few hundred years. The Islamic Empire really started about the mid 600s AD. So there was some time in there in between. But there is precedent in the Bible for this, because often when you read the Old Testament prophets, they will be prophesying about the Messiah. And in that passage, they will be prophesying that we can look back now and we know is his first coming as a baby. And then they will also prophesy in the same passage about his ruling and reigning the millennial kingdom. And they do not differentiate between, they don't say, and the first coming is blah, blah, and then there's going to be over 2,000 years, and then there will be the second coming. They don't say that. And in their minds, it was all kind of like together. And that's why it was so hard for the Jewish people to accept Jesus as their Messiah. They're like, where's the ruling and reigning that the prophets talked about? Well, it wasn't time for that yet. So all that just to say, this is not unprecedented in the Bible that there would be an unforetold gap, and that's okay as long as it's in succession. That gap is not a problem in Scripture. It doesn't have to be the very next thing.
Sure, and I would say the other piece of this is that it's just a different logical framework. So there's one logical framework where we're going to say these are following each other in timeline succession. So that's one framework, that's one paradigm. The other paradigm is these are following each other in succession in terms of the actual physical and kingdom boundaries themselves. And if we're going sort of with this other paradigm, we're not going just pure linear, it makes total sense that it would be the Islamic Empire that comes up. And let me just show you what that looks like for a moment.
Yeah.
Because
there you go.
You'll notice this looks far more like what we were looking at a minute ago. This encompasses that area. This isn't going all the way far, far, far west in Europe, all the way up to London. It wasn't London back there, obviously, but this makes a lot of sense. And the other thing for me is that when we look at the Bible, we see it being very geographically centered in one area. It is all the Middle East, right? That's what we're looking at all the time. So in order for us to really think about this, it's like, okay, we kind of have two paradigms. We can look at it from this linear timeline perspective. We can also look at it from a geographical perspective. And I think this makes sense. And one of our commenters says, we see this as being really disjointed, but they would not have seen this as being illogical. This would have totally made sense. So that's fantastic insight. So let's just kind of do a little comparison for a moment. Points for this being the Roman Empire. What would be the case there, Mom?
All right, just to recap it, we stated it before. Linearly, that works great for us. It was next. So seriously, I mean, and we're not trying to just like, oh, the Roman Empire, that's how stupid if anybody believes that. No. It might be because it was the very next one in line. They made their swords and their weaponry out of iron. We've got iron legs, so you could say that. They did use crucifixion to keep people in line. That's pretty brutal. It's like the worst means of torture to die ever invented. So you can say, okay, so they were crushing in that way. But let's talk about some on the other side of the coin, the points for the Islamic Empire. To recap Daniel 2:40, it says of this kingdom, and there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, and I highlighted this, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters things. And then like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. All what? Well, all the three kingdoms that we just talked about. That has to be it. So if you look at the text, and again, good hermeneutics here, what does it say about the iron? It defines it for us. Does it say that because iron is used for weapons? No, it says, because this is verse 40, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters things. It has absolutely nothing to do with what your weapons are made out of or the fact that you might be manufacturing iron. It says nothing about that. It's breaking to pieces and shattering. So Noelle, talk to us a little bit about what that actually plays out and looks like, because I think that's really important as we decide, am I team Roman Empire or am I team Islamic Caliphate? What are we talking
about? Well, again, so I had this very, Roman-centric education growing up in the States. One of the things that they talk about is Pax Romana, or all roads lead to Rome. While we can look at things like crucifixion, Rome was autocratic. It didn't actually break and crush all things. They were big on integration and assimilation and bringing in other cultures. Basically, any god that you had, if you got conquered by Rome, they're like, yeah, we'll take that god, like all about that. We're all polytheists, And they were big on sort of allowing this self-rule in a lot of ways and allowing these conquered territories and these conquered nations to be independent and to retain their culture, retain their language in a lot of cases. The other thing is, they allowed the Jewish people in particular to have a lot of flexibility as far as the laws were concerned. We talked a lot in the book of Luke and in the book of Acts how Rome created some special loopholes, some special allowances for the Jewish people because they were the only monotheists in the whole Roman Empire. And so they were like, okay, we're gonna allow you to be monotheists. We're not gonna force that upon you. We're not gonna force you to be polytheists. We're gonna let you do that. And they were pretty flexible with them. They wanted everybody to be at peace with each other. So to construe Rome as being the empire that breaks to pieces and shatters all things doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Rome united, actually.
Yeah, built them roads, built them aqueducts. They were
great engineers. Yeah, built concrete.
They love to build
quite
stuff.
Know how they did that. They again, all roads lead to Rome. Pax Romana. They're big on peace. They're big on unity, and they were pretty flexible with a lot of peoples and integrating them. So when I read this just from that historical perspective, I go, I just don't understand how this can be Rome. I don't understand how we get there. And again, iron has nothing to do in this case with the physical materials that they were using. It has to do with it being strong and being crushing and being breaking to a point that it shatters everything. So can Rome really be that crushing force? I would argue no. So the question is, did the Roman Empire crush the other empires before it in Daniel's statue? So again, it says, it shall break and crush all of these previous three empires. That map we showed just really says no. They took over at most maybe a third of the other empires.
For a time, even. Not even for a very long time. They decided we can't go that far east. We're backing out.
They just went back west. Yeah. That seems like a far cry from crushing them. When you look at those actual maps of the first three, they're expanding, but it's the same central geography. On the other hand, the Islamic Caliphate or the Islamic Empire does fit the shattering, breaking into pieces, crushing narrative, and it does take over all those three previous empires just beautifully from a geographic perspective.
Yeah,
So
it seems to fit the picture so much better. And let's just talk for a second about Islam as a totalitarian regime. So what we're going to say about Islam here, I want to be careful that we don't come across saying all Muslims are terrifying and horrible and crushing and breaking people into bits. We have met and we know some absolutely lovely Muslims. I've had the privilege of leading one to Jesus. I've never had that privilege with a Jewish person yet, although I pray that I will someday. So we love the Muslims. We love the Jews. We love the Muslims because Jesus loves all of them and he gave us grace. So of course we would do that. But as
really
we're talking
specifically,
about,
just to stop for a moment, really specifically, the text also is not saying this. The text is not talking about a person or even a people group. It's not even necessarily talking about Islam as a religion. This is talking about the Islamic Empire as an autocratic state, as an autocratic kingdom,
a regime.
So that's how it talked about the Babylonian Empire. It didn't say, Babylonians are like this. Same with the Medo-Persian. It didn't say Medo-Persians are this way or Grecians, all Greeks are. It's talking about an empire, this regime, this state, this governmental autocratic entity. Continue.
Well put. So as we look back at history, and probably many of us have never even studied anything about the Islamic Caliphate and the Middle Eastern history because we're so Western, that's all we study. But if you look at it, when Islam spread and it began to conquer these nations, as we saw in the map, it literally obliterated everything about those places. It obliterated their culture, their language. It obliterated their entire way of life. They would erase their history. They still do this. In fact, to this day, the Muslim control of the Temple Mount denies that Israel has any connection historically or culturally to that Temple Mount. I mean, it flies in the face of history that is verifiable on so many levels. And yet they will say, there was no Israel, there was no temple, there's nothing here. And they will sometimes bring in bulldozers to various very sacred sites for Israel, and they will attempt to utterly destroy any archaeological evidence that there was ever an Israel prior to 1946 or whenever it was that they became a nation. Can't remember now. 45. So this is not something old. This is what they do as a regime. In fact, Noelle, do you have that little Google? Or,
no, I don't. But
okay.
The headline says 3 Jewish Israelis indicted for praying on the Temple Mount.
2 years ago.
Yeah, this was 2 years ago. So you do see that is
crushing, breaking, destroying.
Not like
you
Rome,
can't even
where
pray
they
up
were
there.
like, you're allowed to be Jewish and you're allowed to be polytheistic. This is a regime that, crushes everything else. We have to wrap up with why any of this matters, though. Why are we even bothering?
Exactly.
Why are we going back and forth? Is it Rome? Is it the Islamic Caliphate?
You're probably like, why does it matter? Why do you care? Why have we spent 20 minutes on this or a half hour? All right. So it actually does matter a lot. It matters a lot because now, listen, hang with me if you are not typically a student of Bible prophecy. If you hear my cat, she's just amening in the background.
She is a student of Bible prophecy.
Yes, she is. She's very good at it. If you're not, don't worry because we're going to try to make this simple. But the Bible, and we'll go through a lot of this in the book of Daniel coming up, the Bible makes clear that in the end time, so the last part of human history, there will be a 7-year time of trouble on the earth like has never been before. We call it the tribulation, and it will be led in the providence of God by an Antichrist. The Bible calls him the Antichrist, so the absolute opposite of Christ. This is not just the opposite. This is an opposition to everything that Jesus is. This is a man under the control and domain of Satan himself. He's indwelt at a given point by Satan. So this Antichrist will come on the scene. After that, we have a 1,000-year millennial reign of Jesus Christ, where he will reign and rule on this earth. That's going to be fabulous. So, just got to get through the tribulation first to get to the good stuff. And then eternity after that. So that's kind of your basic overview. But here's why it matters. Because the Antichrist comes out of whatever this legs of iron situation is. So
Yes.
if you get that wrong, then you may not be looking in the right place for him to appear on the scene. And I don't know about you guys. I do know about you. This is tongue in cheek. I don't like to be blindsided in life. I don't like it. And I don't think anybody out there is like, oh, I love it. Or, give me bad news. Like, I wasn't expecting it. Woo-hoo, it's wonderful. No, surprise parties will take, but don't blindside me with bad information and bad news. So what I like to do in my life is I like to at least know what the possibilities are. So maybe we get done with this and you're like, nope, I'm still dyed in the wool. I'm Roman Empire team all the way. I think whatever you said about that Islamic thing is crazy. That's totally fine. But would you at least say in your mind, but maybe? And maybe you're like, no, you totally convinced me. I'm 100% team Islamic Caliphate for the end times thing. I don't think he's going to come from Rome. Great. But would you at least understand that there is that possibility that maybe we're wrong and it is Rome? And that way, regardless of what happens, you're okay. You're looking for it, right? You don't get blindsided by it.
Absolutely. So, recap. Antichrist, the very end times, think apocalypse, end of days. Antichrist is going to be the one who very much leads all of the tribulation and just wreaks havoc on the world. A couple of things that we know about the Antichrist. He's going to break onto the scene with a peace treaty for Israel that is going to make peace with the entire world. And he is going to make peace with the entire world. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be awesome, right? And then 3.5 years in, he's going to bust into the temple and he's going to set himself up as the Christ, as God. And it's going to be horrific. And from there, it just goes even further downhill. So this is what's really interesting to me. I was always told it was the Roman Empire. So the Antichrist is going to come out of the Roman Empire. Now, I was also always told that means that he's going to come out of Russia. I do think that part of that was that there was, over the course of American history, been some scares with Russia. Sometimes in various political situations, everyone's been a little freaked out about Russia. I think that influenced that thought process a fair bit. But just from a logical perspective, if somebody came out of Russia and was able to negotiate a peace treaty between all of the Middle Eastern countries who have been antagonistic towards Israel for all of history and Israel, that's impressive. Like, how you do that coming out of amazing. Okay. But if this person is actually coming out of an Islamic state, if this person is coming out of the Islamic Caliphate, out of the Islamic regime, they actually have some authority and agency and intrinsic trust with those countries to broker peace with Israel. And to me, it makes far more logical sense that a person coming from that part of the world would be able to put together this massive peace treaty with the entire world than somebody who's coming out of Russia. And again, I worry that because we don't always have a great hermeneutic and we're imposing our political or moral or cultural or social beliefs on the text, that we read it and go, where will the Antichrist come? Well, we're kind of freaked out about Russia right now, so probably Russia. It's probably a Russian guy, and I can back into that if I do the following things. I don't think anybody's being nefarious or difficult about it, but that's sort of our natural inclination as humans is like, well, I read in the news, therefore. And so we don't want to be making claims on this based on what the world's like today or, who we're freaked out about today and where the war is today. But it does make logical sense that the person who is going to, negotiate that peace treaty and then also really just wreak havoc is going to come from this part of the world. Again, the Bible is completely centered around the Middle East geographically. That's where everything occurs.
Yep.
It's also
starts and ends right there.
Yeah. It also makes logical sense that that's what's going to happen. One other thing, and then we're going to wrap this up because, oh my goodness, you have hung in there. You guys are brilliant.
Thank you.
Amazing. It was always confusing to me because, I was told he's coming out of Russia and that's where the Antichrist is going to be. We know at the 3.5 year mark, he goes into the temple in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount And this will be the Jewish temple that God told them to build. And he's going to set himself up as God. And it's called the abomination of desolation. It's this huge issue. Everything goes downhill from there. That's a 3.5 year mark. I was always like, so he's going to go all the way from Russia to Jerusalem? Why is he going to do, like, that seems like a long trek, you know? Like, why is he in Jerusalem to begin with?
What's the point?
What's his deal there? That's a bizarre place to go. Why is he all obsessed with that? Again, from a logical perspective, it makes so much more sense. If you've got somebody who's already there, who's already in that region, who has the trust and the authority and has proven themselves and has this intrinsic characteristic that makes themselves a fantastic candidate to be garnering, all this goodwill and to be negotiating these peace treaties, of course he's going to be there. That's where he's going to be headquartered. Obviously, that is going to be the center of this whole story. Again, I'm personally it's the Islamic Caliphate, it's the Islamic regime camp. And I only got there a few days ago after studying this. Before that, I was like, oh, it's the Roman Empire, it's Russia. Like, I hadn't really thought about it. So that's where I am. We're going to wrap this up. But in the comments, just curious, I'm not confident that there is a single right answer that we have to know. I just know that we need to understand what the options are so we can be looking. I'm just curious if you're willing to share, which one do you think it is? Do you think the iron represents the Roman Empire? Or are you thinking that the iron represents the Islamic Caliphate, the Islamic Empire? Just curious.
I'm anxious to see this. Anxious to see.
Share that with us.
And as you're typing that in, we want you to know, you're probably like, but wait, there's more. But what about the feet with the clay and the iron? I mean, what about that? We're just simply out of time. So you're going to have to come back next week to find out about that. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Are we?
So Robin says Islamic. Somebody says not Rome. Somebody says I'm keeping my options open. I like that. I like that. Someone else is voting Islamic Empire for this.
Yep.
Somebody says Roman Empire. Lots more reasons than time permits. Okay. Margie says suspense. Somebody says, after listening tonight, I am leaning towards the Islamic Empire. Someone else says, well, after tonight, Islamic. Somebody else says Rome. You know what I love? I love that we can lean either way, and it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because the Bible does not specifically tell us. So,
but it is important to not be so locked into one interpretation or one thing that if we're not right, we miss it and we're blindsided by it. That's really our goal here is if, heaven forbid, we end up living in the end days and these things start coming true, that we don't miss it because we're like, that can't be the guy. He's not from Rome. He's not from Russia. And then just be completely blindsided. That's what we don't want for you. We've got somebody else saying, not sure. And I think that's where we should leave it tonight because it is suspenseful. It's not easy, but these are the fun conversations we get to have. And next week, oh my goodness, do we get to have a fun conversation. We will be with you same time, same place to go through what the iron and the clay represent. Thank you for hanging in with us tonight. We always love doing this with you. You all are just brilliant, competent, wonderful Bible scholars, and now you're well studied in hermeneutics. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.